Okay, looks like I'm recording. And guys, I am so super excited to have on the program Tom Harris. So Tom Harris, um, in the animal rights movement, we keep on using the word legend. So like people will say this to me all the time. They'll be like, "Hey, legend, how you doing?" And I have not earned that title. We need another term because there are people in this movement who are beyond legend status. So anyway, Tom Harris is one of those people. He was involved in the SHAC campaign really early on in the UK. And this is just such a joy to have you on. Welcome to the program, Tom.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, I don't know if I'm a legend, but thank you for having me. It means a lot to be
Well,
here.
you are a legend, and you're also an author. And so the reason why we originally had invited you onto Wayne Shung's program was because of your new book called Your Neighbor Kills Puppies, which is about the SHAC campaign. And that's just a phenomenal book that I would recommend anybody to read. It's anybody inside, outside the animal rights movement, but especially inside the animal rights movement. We sort of overlook the history a lot. It wasn't until like several years ago that I even started to learn about the ALF history and all that sort of stuff. So I would consider myself part of the movement for about 6, 7 years at this point. So that's a long time to go without even knowing, what preceded all of this. So your book is a fantastic primer on the early animal rights movement, especially in the UK, where a lot of this stuff started. So why don't you give me a little bit of the just like a quick kind of history recap of, how the SHAC campaign got started? Because I know it's a long history and a lot of steps along the way.
No, it really is. And I think actually, like, I would say for my book, it starts in the mid 1990s. But really, like, already then we had a very well established animal liberation. But like the history of the movement goes really back to the 1960s, if not beyond. But the SHAC campaign started, I suppose the short version, it started in 1997 following, or 1999 following the release of undercover footage from inside Europe's largest animal testing laboratory,
Hmm.
Huntingdon Life Sciences. And the footage was filmed at the same time in the UK and in their American laboratory as well in New Jersey. And it showed just horrific violence. And I think what's important to remember now and to be aware of back then was this violence, punching dogs in the face, cutting open live primates, slitting them open from the throat to the groin without anesthesia. It was horrific to see, but it wasn't unusual. That this was a day in the life of any laboratory anywhere in the world, but we just happened to be seeing it for the first time for a lot of people. When it aired in the UK, this footage, it was on one of our main TV channels. We only had 4 terrestrial TV channels at the time, and yeah, it was huge. It kind of blew up, and it inspired essentially this movement. And there was 3 coordinators of the campaign: Greg, Natasha, Heather. And I think what they did that made SHAC really special and made it into something that is a part of our history that we should be studying and remembering is that they looked at this laboratory and they said, okay, we're going to start a campaign to close them down. We're not starting a campaign to tell everyone how bad this is or to like ask them to do better. Like, we're going to close them down. And this isn't
Hmm.
rhetoric or pie in the sky. That's what we're going to do. There's no ifs, no buts, no compromises. We're closing this place. And going into it with that attitude, it then became a matter of working backwards. Like, look, at this is a business. This is a multinational business. As I said, they had a laboratory in the UK. They have a laboratory, well, they had 2 in the UK, 1 in America, and they're a huge company, like millions of pounds of turnover. And so how do you close down a business? And so it just became this matter of deconstructing them and identifying every
Hmm.
company that they needed to survive, but who didn't need them. So targeting their laundry suppliers, their gas suppliers, their internet, their banking, their insurers, their
Hmm.
accountants, their shareholders. And it was highly effective. And coupled with that, there was very much this kind of idea that we should make it personal, that the people who make terrible decisions and every bad thing that happens on this planet is because someone in some office somewhere has signed a bit of paper or made this decision. It's not the company's fault, it's their fault. And so we took the protest to those people, to their homes, to their golf clubs, to their theatre nights,
Hmm.
to literally anywhere we needed to be So these people knew they just couldn't clock off at the end of the day because after all, the animals can't. And yeah, and it was hugely effective. So I suppose that's the concise history of the SHAC campaign. Obviously, that there's a book about it. There's a lot more in it, but that's how it really got started.
And the book that you've written is a long book. I'm actually still working my way through it. I had told you a few weeks ago it'll take me a week to get through this book, and here we are a couple weeks later, and I still haven't finished it. But it reads really. It's an exciting read. You really take people inside all of these protests, and I mean, like we look at sort of protests nowadays and some of the intensity that I see, and sometimes I'm blown away by the intensity. Then I read your book, and like one of the early protests for Consort that you're describing, somebody's quote that it's just sort of like a medieval siege. That's really what it was like. It was like people all over trying to get into this place, and police, and just chaos is kind of the way that I would describe it.
It was that was Hillgrove, the siege. It was Consort was the initial campaign to close down a puppy farm that's breeding dogs for testing. Hillgrove came second, which was aiming to close down a commercial cattery, a cat farm that was breeding cats for animal testing. And yeah, I just missed out on that. I think I was probably about 14 when that happened. So I was just kind of getting involved in the periphery of the movement at that point. And so unfortunately I missed that. But I mean, everyone I've spoken to that was there, so it was the best protest they've ever been on. But it was, people turned up to this protest at this cat farm on coaches and minibuses or driving, expecting what had always been the case, and for most of us is what we're used to. You turn up, you get off, you go and do your protest outside the farm or outside the premises. But this time they turned up and there's police roadblocks everywhere. They can't even get to the site. They're stopped like a long walk away, a few miles away from the facility. They're like having their like masks pulled off and having their videos, but their faces, their feet, their clothes are all videoed and logged. And eventually they're let out. They're like, and they have to go through police cordon after police cordon to get to the site. And when they get there, the police have constructed these like I can't remember how tall they were, but they're huge, like these huge metal walls, all around the whole site. And then every so often there's like a police watchtower built into the wall. And so it is like a medieval fortress. So you can't see the farm. There's like nothing is visible. It's just this steel wall with police every so often mounted around the top. The police have set up their own mobile phone network around the site to be able to communicate with each other because it's a rural location. And so people go to do this protest, they get frustrated trying to get there, then they get there and they can't even see what they're protesting against because there's this fence. And so then the protest really kind of went from like, maybe we're going to try and get in and grab some cats and get away, to this wall's coming down. And then like you say, it just erupted. And there was like, the police have planted like agent provocateurs into the crowd to try and like stir up trouble. And it just turned into absolute chaos. And there's some remarkable video footage about it. It's not easy to get hold of now, but people who've like ripped up like gate posts and stuff, and they're trying to crowbar open the thing with these full-size telegraph poles and digging under the and every now and then the gates would just open and mounted police would come charging out, just swinging batons, and just it's like Helm's Deep or something,
like a castle siege. Well, we kind of jumped backwards, and I think some people might be lost. They're gonna like, okay, SHAC campaign, Consort, Hillgrove. So the Hillgrove farm was like kind of a last minute decision, I know, like because it sounded like the Consort campaign got started. So this was like sort of what preceded the SHAC campaign. Consort got the win. They announced the win, like that they were going to close down essentially and get, on the eve of a protest. And the organizers were very dexterous and were like, okay, we're going to pick our next target instantly. Do I have that right? And let's just give people a little bit of the backstory.
Okay, so it really, like the whole idea kind of it started with Greg deciding he was going to close down Consort, and it really came out of the momentum that had built up around the live export campaigns here in the early 1990s. And so he wanted to close down Consort Farm, and really that's where I suppose this model of secondary targeting and making things personal, and not going home until you've won. That really started there, and I suppose they cut their teeth on that campaign. And it was a fairly small family business, and I think it took a couple of years to close the puppy farm. I think they had already decided that the next target was going to be Hillgrove Cat Farm, but as you say, the way it kind of transpired was like a lot quicker than anyone expected. Is literally the owner of the farm announced, "I'm closing, I'm done." And he deliberately waited until the night before a big national protest had been arranged, just to try like one last kind of way to like be annoying, because it was like, oh, you've wasted your time arranging this protest. And so, bearing in mind this is before mobile phones were really a thing, they managed to contact 1,000 people by landline telephones and word of mouth and whatever, and moved within a matter of hours this protest that was, people were getting ready to go to concert in the morning, and it all moved straight over to Hillgrove. So the first protest at Hillgrove, was I don't think it wasn't that protest, it wasn't the Battle of Hillgrove, but it was still a big protest, and I think it really showed the energy of the movement at the time, I suppose, and like you say, the dexterity and just this idea that people were in this, like where the founders of SHAC were leading, like the movement was following, because it was working, it was winning, and we're closed this puppy farm, now we're going to close Hillgrove, and they did. And then with that constantly learning, constantly trying new things, and I think that's an important lesson for all of us. They then after Hillgrove was won, they then moved on to launching the SHAC campaign and trying to close down Europe's largest animal testing laboratory. But I think there's some interesting things around why that happened, actually, why they moved on to Huntingdon Life Sciences, because I think a lot of people feel it was just kind of maybe like an ego thing, or like we kind of got too big for our boots, and we kind of we're going for the biggest target we could. But it was actually the opposite. It was actually it was clear like it was time to take on something bigger. These breeders were falling, and inspired by Hillgrove, other activists had launched other campaigns. So we had a whole spate of vivisection breeders closing across the UK. It was not just Consort and Hillgrove, but Shamrock Monkey Farm, Regal Rabbit Farm, and a later Newchurch Guinea Pig Farm. So when this video footage came out from Huntingdon Life Sciences during the Hillgrove campaign, it was the first time a lot of people had seen inside a vivisection laboratory, even people within the movement, really, to see video from inside the laboratory. And so people were horrified, seeing dogs like, man's best friend being like punched in the face and swung against walls, and not really much happened about it. So people wanted to do something, but it also just outraged the public, obviously. And so Huntingdon Life Sciences, overnight, a bunch of their customers withdrew their contracts, and as a result, their share price tumbled. So when SHAC stepped up and took this campaign on, there was a campaign already there, a smaller campaign. But when SHAC joined in, like, Huntingdon Life Sciences share price had already tumbled from like several pounds to barely 1p, and they had a huge bank loan from a British bank. And really, at that point, all that was needed to close them was to convince this one bank to cancel this one loan. So actually, they were very like low-hanging fruit. They were a weak target at the time, and within a year, that bank did cancel that loan, and really that should have been the end of it all. But
but the government stepped in, and it seems to me, and I think you've said this, and it seems to me that the reason why the government stepped in was not really necessarily this one lab. It was like the precedent. I think that they didn't want to see the precedent that these activists can win, and you guys started to get win after win. And like you said, you were very close. If the government hadn't stepped in, it probably would have been the end of it. Who's that, by the way? Who's this?
This is Nifla. She wants to be part of the interview, don't you?
Yes. I've got somebody here too. We both got little guys.
Oh,
yeah. That's a little Giuseppe right there.
What do you want to say?
My friend's pup. Yeah. What do you want to say? Don't kill puppies. That would be a good thing, right? So okay, so just to give people a little more context, Tom got a 5-year prison sentence for this campaign. a lot of the organizers ended up going to prison. I think you served 2 years of that. And still, like, and this is one of the largest campaigns. So I think the first time that I was hearing the word SHAC, you know, from activists like Wayne, who I work with, and you know, I heard people talking about this, but I didn't know much. I did watch early on that movie, The Animal People, which is about the SHAC USA campaign. But still to this day, so like I mentioned, for the last few weeks, I've been reading your book. I'll be out at a coffee shop reading books, you know, and reading the book, and the people will be asking me what I'm reading. I'm like, oh, about the SHAC campaign. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I think I've heard of that. But like I said, just going back, like this is just a major part of our history that is sort of a blind spot. So it's something that we should be studying, not only because it was extremely effective, but also just because, I mean, hats off to you. Like the level of courage and conviction that these activists had is something that we should all be mirroring today, as it was insanely impressive. Like just throwing all caution to the wind. I mean, I'm not saying y'all weren't smart and strategic, because you were, but there just seemed to be a real lack of like, whatever happens, lack of like concern for your own well-being. You were very willing, and you yourself and the organizers and many of the activists were very, very willing to put themselves in harm's way for these dogs, cats, whatever animal was being harmed by these companies. And I mean, all I can really say is thank you. That's just so, it's such a lesson for us, and something that we should all be emulating, I think. But it is a shame that more people don't know about it. And that's why it's great that you have written this book that gives us such a great history of it. I saw in another interview you had done, and I was talking about the animal rights movement, and I remember this interview you did with Jamie Woodhouse, which was really great. And you had mentioned sort of your discomfort with animal rights, and you prefer animal liberation. So I'm trying to correct that. So tell me a little bit about that. I know you've already said that to Jamie, but yeah.
I mean, and I mean, it's kind of the term, the colloquial term that most of us use, as you know, it's the animal rights movement, and you know, I do use it, but I just think for me, like the idea of rights, like the idea of human rights, for example, we know what we need, right? And so when we're kind of campaigning for human rights, people can say, oh, you know, these are the basic rights that I need, and you know, and speaking to other people, these are collectively the rights that should be, you know, the basis of what human rights are. And although, like, you know, rights are this kind of inherent thing that we all naturally should have and whatever, but ultimately we as humans still need to decide what they are, and then that applies to other animals. Like, what rights do they need? What are their basic needs to function and to enjoy life and to have their own agency? And I just feel a little bit uncomfortable around the idea that even in that context, if we're granting them these rights, essentially, that's what it has to be. At some point, we have to decide what those rights are for these other animals. And I just feel, really, do they want that, or do they just want us to leave them the fuck alone? I think that's really where it comes from. So for me, I think, you know, they are right. The right to be left alone, the right to life, the right to their own agency, and all of those things are very important. And realistically, we're going to get to that point through probably various ways, but mostly probably through the legal system, and that will probably involve some kind of right giving. But for me, like, I identify as a liberationist because I want to see them free. I want them to see them empowered and living in their own agency and living their own lives without human interference.
Right. I like also that you mentioned that, you know, one of the things that set this campaign apart was just the belief that we will win, the determination. And that's why I guess in America, I've gravitated towards groups like Direct Action Everywhere. And I've really appreciated the work of CAFT and Animal Activism Collective. And it's partly because these activists have that same belief. We will get these wins. We will do it no matter how long it takes. DXC kind of goes, I think, more like animal agriculture route. And then CAFT goes for fur and stuff. So CAFT will get like kind of quicker wins and stuff like that. But there's a real belief And sometimes I'm even like, really, you think we're gonna get, animal bill of rights by 2050 or something? Like that's one of the goals for direct action everywhere. But I think it is very important that we just, for one, that we believe that we will win. And so let's talk about you a little bit, because you're somebody who is like a real rebel from the start. So I heard you talking about how like this all sort of started for you at like 9 years old when you sort of saw, I'll let you tell the story, but how did you like go and like, I guess my question is like, why were you so willing to put yourself on the line at such a young age? When we're talking like 14, 15 years old, like you said, is when really you started to get involved. But take us back to 9, and then from 9 to 15, if you could.
Okay, so when I was 9,
Yeah.
and anyone who's heard me talk will probably have heard the story, but I was 9 years old, and I was at a petting zoo outside of a farm shop that my dad used to go to quite regularly to get his like organic meat, and or for all of us, for the family who would do that shopping there. And yeah, they had this petting zoo outside, which was I don't know if it's deliberately cynical or if there was just some that kind of like cognitive dissonance stuff going on, but yeah, I would go there and my dad would go inside, do his shopping. I'd stay outside and play with particularly these pigs that they had there, these 2 Vietnamese potbelly pigs, and one of them, I think her name was Violet, and I used to love seeing her, and she'd get all excited when she saw me, and I'd be all happy, a 9-year-old happy to see her, and I'd be playing with her. And then this one Christmas my dad came out while I was playing with Violet and was like, Tom, come inside, they're giving out free mince pies inside the farm shop. So I like mince pies, and so I ran into this shop, and it was I don't, it was just basically that scene out of Ace Ventura when he goes into that trophy room, that room of death. That was basically what it was like for me, and similar reaction. It was braces of pheasants hung up by their feet. There was like these plates of meat which had like juice, which was quite clearly blood of the victims. And the most striking thing, the thing that really like I couldn't not see, was just there's these pigs hanging up by hooks along one of the walls, like completely skinned, but very obviously whole carcasses of pigs. And I saw them, and I knew, even at 9 years old, I knew they weren't Vietnamese potbelly pigs. They were clearly like the pigs that are in most British farms, but nonetheless, like I was looking at these pigs, and I couldn't not make that connection to Violet, like my friend outside. Like, and I know she wasn't my friend, and the fact we didn't go off like skateboarding together or whatever, but I did have a connection. I could look into her eyes. I could see when she was happy. I could see when she was tired, or when she was kind of done, or when she wanted a belly rub or whatever. And I could see that connection. I could see that life in her, and that agency. And then just to see these lifeless bodies hanging there, and what are this? They're her friends, her family, and it just something just snapped to me, really, I think. And I went home in silence, and as soon as I got home, I announced I was vegetarian. But there was something deeper, and I think it took me years really to recognize the other big thing that happened, or the bigger part of it, which was that how can I trust what I'm being told by my parents, or by my teachers, or by all these authority figures that have told me this is okay, that have taken me to places to eat these bodies, that have put this food in front of me, that have told me they die of natural causes, that it's normal, that it's natural. Like, it's bullshit. Like, all of it is bullshit. Everything is bullshit. And so I'm 9 years old, and I'm going vegetarian, but I'm suddenly questioning everything, and I'm starting to get into trouble at school because if something's not right, then I will say something, I'll do something, I'll make that right. I'll call out the teachers for fat shaming people. And so I started getting in trouble in school for consistently, really, for doing the right thing, certainly in my eyes the right thing. And then that's really just compounding this message. It's like, like these institutions of authority, they don't exist for my benefit, they don't exist for anyone's benefit, they just exist to perpetuate the norm, and the norm can be terrible. So that kind of went on for a few years. I think I was 13 and my brother introduced me to punk music, and I think that was a huge moment for me. I think finding a culture that reflected so much of how I felt. This idea that there were problems in the world, but we weren't just going to bury our heads in the sand. We were going to do something about it. We were going to take to the streets. We were going to take to the darkness. We were going to do something, and that really inspired me.
Who were you
And I
listening
think,
to, if you remember? Do you remember the
so
bands?
I do remember the first punk-ish thing I heard was the first Hole album, and then it was, I think it was Shelter was the next thing I heard, and then the third Rancid album, Out Come the Wolves, I think, and that's still my favorite album. And
Wow,
yeah,
nice.
so it was and then from there, once I kind of hit Rancid, then it just kind of opened up this kind of world of punk music, and I got into quite a lot of it, and then found things like Crass and Conflict, and things that really spoke to that kind of side of me. And I think as well, like I've got ADHD, and it wasn't diagnosed as a child, but I am, in hindsight, I kind of feel like punk music is literally just a soundtrack to ADHD, isn't it? It's just people screaming about something for 2 minutes, and then like, okay, next one, scream about something else for 2 minutes. So I think that probably appealed to me on some subconscious level as well. But yeah, I think through punk, I really found me and my community. And I grew up in a little town in the UK in the 90s. There wasn't a punk scene where I lived. It was just me walking around my Mohican and being beaten up for it. But yeah, I think all these things just kind of solidified in me. And then I was 15 when my brother, again, actually, he found this article in this heavy metal magazine about the straight edge scene over in America. And again, there were straight edge things happening in the UK. Of course, there was all over the world, but it was where I lived, it wasn't a thing. And but I read this article, and it kind of conflated a lot of the Green Scare ELF actions, the big arson attacks and liberations that had happened across the US around that period. And it was kind of saying like, yeah, this is connected to this straight edge movement. And I was reading this article like, I don't know who these people are. I'm probably never going to meet them. They live the other side of the world. But these are my people, like the people I go to school with. Like, some of them are acquaintances and I hang out with them, whatever, but these are my people. And I stopped drinking when I was 15. I came straight edge when I was 15, and then started kind of, I suppose, properly radicalizing myself. And I would go out and put up stickers, put up posters, glue up locks. And I didn't there was no wider movement. Like I said, I was in a small town. Me and my brother did stuff until he went to uni. But it was just us, and we just kind of started things ourselves. I started an animal rights group, and then ended up getting invited out hunt stabbing when I was 16. So I was 16 really when I joined the actual animal rights movement proper.
Wow, that's it. Yeah, and maybe it's because you didn't have like a community of animal liberation activists around you that you decided, I have to do all this myself. I know in your interview with Wayne and with Jamie, you kind of talked about all this do-it-yourself, DIY, that we've somewhat lost in a way. It's almost like I've seen this too myself, and I've seen it in myself, honestly, where I'm looking for like, okay, what's the next thing? Who's putting on this next organization? Who's putting on the next protest? Not realizing I could do that. I can be the person to do that. I guess you were kind of forced to as a young person, since there was nothing going on.
I think so. I mean, the big town over, which is near where I live now, like there actually was an animal rights group. I just didn't know they existed at the time. But I think actually it's more than like the necessity. And the necessity is important, but I think there was actually a deliberate culture at the time to encourage and foster this autonomous activity. And I think what we've really lost is the kind of grassroots movement as a whole, and it's really something I'm kind of focused on trying to rebuild in the UK. But I was, I got like a Animal Liberation Front support group newsletter, around that same time, just before I started hunt stabbing, and that was really one of the big things that inspired me. Is like, flipping through the pages of this newsletter and seeing these people in balaclavas with beagles, and people like smashing windows, and then the next page, a picture from an abattoir or something. And then I think, I found it very inspirational, really, that people were risking, like you said, about me, I suppose, but I was so inspired that other people were risking their freedom, and in some cases their lives, to do this. And I think for me that's so deeply inspirational, because like a lot of the other movements that existed at the time, a lot of the other campaigns, they didn't have that attitude. Like I think if you're risking multiple years in prison for what you believe in, then you really believe in it, and you believe that you're being effective in what you're doing, and therefore you're likely to win. And so like I guess I was kind of drawn to a movement that was like publicizing quite loudly, like, yeah, we're gonna do this, like whatever it takes, we are gonna win though. And that really drew me in. But it was really, like these magazines would tell you how to do stuff. They would tell you how to, they teach you about security culture, about like masking up and like leaving your phone at home, and basic security culture, but also sometimes more complicated stuff too. And they would teach you the best way to write off a car, even, like some of these like publications, like they were, like
Wow.
the information out there, but also like on a much more kind of palatable level, probably for a lot of people. Like it would teach you how to do a like outreach tool, and how to fundraise through that, how to make a placard, how to make a banner, how to organize a protest, how to set up a local meeting, like all these things that like we should all be doing, but most of us don't know how to. But that information was quite readily available, and I think that's really something we need to bring back into the movement, is encouraging people what to do. Like I feel a lot of what we have now, we really lost. I know, if people read my book, they'll probably see why, but we've really lost that kind of grassroots portion of our movement, certainly here in the UK, and I believe in other countries too.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of NGOs and larger organizations, but a lot of what they do, if someone messages them, if someone writes in and says, I saw your latest expose, what can I do to help? Often the response isn't, here's what you can do, it's here's how you can support us, which is, I think there's quite a important differentiation. Like this shouldn't be a spectator sport. We shouldn't be telling people, you can donate to us, you can sign our petition, we have this event coming up in 2 weeks' time. It should be like, yeah, all of those things, sure, like you're an organization, you have to self-sustain, but also here's a guide on how you can set up a local group in your community that will build the movement. And also it'll benefit the NGO that's sending that information, because if we have this grassroots network of local groups and organizers, then when they need something doing, there's this pool of people to call upon to help them with it. So it's important for everyone, but it's really important for our movement, I think. And it was just a very different time, and I think that specifically is something that needs to come back. And like I say, that's my focus now, is working on it. Also, something I was going to mention earlier, actually, that kind of feeds into this, is this idea of like learning our history and stuff. And that's something that's very much changed, because for me, when I became involved, like I say, the very late 90s, the tail end of the 1990s, or the late 1900s, as the kids are saying now. But when I became involved, I had friends and I suppose mentors, really, but friends and comrades, colleagues, who taught me things like how to operate a local group, how to coordinate protests, and how to do direct action, and how to organize campaigns, all these kind of things. But some of these people were activists that had been around since the 70s or 80s, who had been involved. Like, some of them had been friends of like Ronnie Lee, who like founded the Animal Liberation Front, and people like that. And so there was this direct chain of knowledge all the way through our movement. And I really felt that. So when I became involved, like in the 90s, I knew everything about what had happened in the 20-30 years before. Like I knew about the attempted liberation of Rocky the Dolphin. I knew about the liberation leagues and all these things that are huge parts of our movement. A lot of people probably don't even know what I'm talking about when I say them, but they're huge parts of our movement, our history. But this knowledge was there, and we shared this information, and there was newsletters going around that would have this information, and I would absorb it. Those pictures, those old black and white photos of people with liberated animals, like that was like everything to me, and I absorbed that history. But then with what happened with the SHAC campaign, and yeah, I'm sure we're getting to that, but what happened to us with the SHAC campaign, there was a very deliberate attempt to, in the words of the government, eradicate our movement. And And they kind of did that, or they eradicated the grassroots level of our movement. And so there's this kind of
Right.
period, maybe like 10 years or so in the early 2000s, and there was like not really anything happening. Like the movement was dead, really. And then the new movement grew up out of, not even out of the ashes of that, the new movement grew up out of the environmental movement. So a lot of the groups we have now, that's where they came from. Even if not, you know, like Animal Rebellion, for example, directly from Extinction Rebellion, but others,
Right.
even if they weren't, you know, environmental focused, which most of them are, which is why most focus on animal agriculture. But if they weren't environmentally focused, they certainly drew from that culture. Whereas the old animal rights movement was forgotten, because why wouldn't it be? There'd been this 10-year gap and there was no one passing the knowledge on, as there had been for me, which is absolutely on my generation for stepping back and letting that happen. So that's why the knowledge gap is lost, and that's part of the reason I want to do what I can to kind of make people excited again, because the history of the animal liberation movement is incredible. Like, it's incredible, and I think anyone who starts deep diving it is going to find mad and amazing and weird and wonderful things there that you can even begin to imagine.
Yeah. I mean, and I think what attracted me to it was, well, one, I want to see animal liberation, so I was just automatically interested. But part of it, I think, was just that the imagery is cool. Like, I mean, just seeing, like, you know, these, like you said, guys in balaclavas or women in balaclavas holding animals. These are the real life superheroes. Like, we're celebrating like Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, these people who are fictional versions of basically animal liberationists, you know, like people saving beings from these horrific places against all odds. So yeah, it's a shame. Yeah, I share the goal to try to reintroduce that, even though I had no part in it. I would love that people kind of see this again. I have like comic books, you know, that someone loaned me that are like, you know, people raiding labs and stuff. And it's just like, this is really interesting, cool stuff. You mentioned the environmental stuff. I had learned from reading some about the ALF that some of that sort of got, at least in America, I guess maybe in America, sort of got started from the people who are, you know, like chaining themselves to trees, or, you know, spiking trees to stop logging and that sort of thing, like the Earth Liberation Front, right? And the Monkey Wrench Gang, the Edward Abbey book, just like all this like very interesting stuff. So like you said, once you go down the rabbit hole, like, I'm pretty fascinated by it, and there's still loads to read about. So I don't know, but that stuff's really cool, and yeah, I'm sort of just blown away by it. The other thing, so we'll kind of get back to your campaign now a little bit, but don't. I see you brainstorming something there. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I am. I was just trying to look up the date that something happened, because there was, like, as you say, you weren't involved in some of this history, but you still want to share it, and I think that's really important. I don't think we have to be involved in these specific actions to want to share them, but there was there's an action that happened. So it was a year after I was born, so I was 1 year old when this happened. But at my local train station where I live now, that was kind of a hub where guinea pigs on their way to London would swap trains and stuff. They were put on the trains there. And there was at least 2 actions where Animal Liberation Front activists like stormed the trains and held up the trains and grabbed the guinea pigs and
wow.
So literally like great train robberies for guinea pigs happening when I was 1 in my local town. Like, how amazing is that? And I just think these kind of things, like, we need to be sharing these stories and showing people what happened. But now back to the real program.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just also just to kind of honor those things, like they get lost to history. Like, these are, heroes. Well, so before we get to the specifics of your campaign, you had mentioned, the, people putting their lives on the line. And one of the sort of the backdrops of the early part of your book, you keep mentioning Barry Horn, who was in jail doing these hunger strikes. And it seems like that was sort of the backdrop that was kind of inspiring a lot of the activists. And What can you tell me about Barry Horn?
Yeah, so Barry was one of the UK's most prolific direct action activists, I think, certainly around the animal rights movement that we've probably ever had. He was involved in, when we're talking about, you know, the history and this imagery and the photos and stuff, like a lot of those photos will have Barry in. And so he was involved in liberating dogs from Harlan Interfauna, that's now Marshall Farms, MBR Acres. He was part of the action where they attempted to liberate Rocky the dolphin, who was the last captive dolphin in the UK. They failed and they got arrested, but as a result, a campaign started that saw Rocky freed. We no longer have any dolphins in captivity here because of his actions and the actions of his friends. And yeah, so he did like a lot of activism. Eventually he was arrested many times, but eventually he was arrested putting these tiny little incendiary devices that were hidden inside cigarette packets and hiding them inside basically the underwear buckets of department stores and stores connected, either who were selling fur or connected to the vivisection industry, Boots, the chemist. And so basically the idea was these little devices would catch fire at night. They would set off to, you know, little watches in, and they would set off to go off in the middle of the night. It would start a little fire in the underwear drawer, and then the smoke from the fire would set the sprinklers off, and the sprinklers would just ruin the entire stock of the shop. And it was a very effective way of causing a huge amount of damage with fairly minimal effort, but very high risk to the people doing it if they got caught, which is what happened to Barry. And he ended up, I can't remember what his sentence was, but maybe it was 18 years, I think. But yeah, he got a very long prison sentence for it. And while he was in prison, he did a series of hunger strikes. And the first, well, they got progressively longer, I think the first three. And during those first three hunger strikes, really, that was the backdrop of the movement I became involved in. Barry was in prison, he was on a hunger strike. And every time he went on a hunger strike, the movement just exploded. There was enough people not in prison that were so angry about what was happening. There was so much energy, there was so much going on in the movement, and a lot of this kind of coincided with the Consort campaign and then the Hillgrove campaign. And so when he went on hunger strike, there would be a huge increase in the rescue of animals from laboratories and arson attacks against butchers' lorries and abattoir lorries. And I think, it really kind of, it gave people that feeling that, you know, like Barry has literally sacrificed a huge part of his life by being in prison doing these actions, and now he's literally putting his own life on the line to try and demand that the government ends animal testing. That was the demand of his hunger strike, to end animal testing. And the government actually agreed to firstly to meet with him, and then they reneged on that, and then they agreed basically to his demands to trick him into stopping the hunger strike because it was getting so much publicity. And so he'd stop the hunger strike, and then they'd be like, no, actually we lied. And so by the third hunger strike, I think it was 60 something days, his third hunger strike, and it all but killed him. And then he never fully recovered, and he went on, you know, a series of smaller hunger strikes afterwards, and eventually like his health just gave out, and he died in 2001 and during a hunger strike in prison. And I think that for me, when I first got involved, like I say, that inspiration of people willing to risk things. Barry Horn was going through that, and then Keith Mann was serving, I think, a 14-year prison sentence. And then at some point during that, he went on the run for a year and then got caught. And then Jill Phipps had fairly recently died when I got involved. She'd been murdered. She was run over by a live export lorry while protesting that, very similar to what happened to Reagan Russell in America recently, a few years ago. And so all of this, I think, for me, was a huge inspiration. If these people are willing to do that, the very least I can do is go and put up some stickers, right? Or put a D-lock up somewhere. Like, what's that? That's nothing. So I think that was a big inspiration for me to be involved in this movement. I think there were various reasons, but I think I was drawn to this movement for that over anything else, really. That level of inspiration and commitment. And like you say about how, you know, this attitude we had at the time where it was kind of, we would do these kind of, some might say reckless, but certainly kind of risky actions we might take. Or I think a lot of that was just we inspired each other. We had the big end of it. We had people like Barry Horn, literally risking his actual life in prison and having risked years of his life in prison. But then even at the kind of lower end of it, we would there's a friendly competition between these local groups, or some of these local groups, and we would kind of try and outdo each other on who could do the most ridiculous thing. And we still have it a little bit, so some of those of us are still around, but the Liverpool group were really active, and they were a few years older than me, a lot of the activists up there. So I really looked up to them, and if I saw them getting on a roof and hanging a banner, I was like, oh, I need to prove myself, I need to do something. So then I'd get my local group down here, would be like, well, what can we do? And we'd go and chain up someone's house, or
I don't think we have that in America.
Here.
I don't think we have the friendly competition thing going in America. I could be wrong.
We certainly had it across the Atlantic. We definitely had the SHAC USA and SHAC UK definitely had that kind of friendly rivalry where we would always try, and I think SHAC USA won when they flipped someone's car upside down outside their house, and we were like, we're out, we don't know how to beat that one.
We're out.
But a lot of it was just, and also when you saw people taking these actions, so a lot of what the SHAC campaign, a lot of their more edgy protests were running into offices to try and give the VHS cassette of the abuse videos to the directors of these companies, so that they couldn't just pass it down the food chain. We'd literally run up to the top floor, sometimes wearing suits, and be like, we'll leave when you watch this. And I'd see my friends chaining themselves inside boardrooms and stuff, and the police there with pickaxes smashing down the glass doors. My friends would get arrested and then get a £50 fine and be released. And it's that's it. That's what, sure, I'll do that for a £50 fine. Or sometimes you'd see people get arrested and then just release that charge after a protest ended. So I think the fact that certainly, especially in the earlier days of SHAC, there weren't real consequences a lot of the time. People were going to prison and stuff, but when the consequences felt quite low, and when I was a teenager, I was like, what do I want out of life? I want to make the world better. I don't really care if I get a job. I don't really care if I have a mortgage, or I just want to do the right thing. So I think that helped for sure. There was a lot of things feeding into it.
Yeah, you were getting, like you said, from school days, you were getting in trouble a lot for doing the right thing. And that seems to have been your life, unfortunately. So considering you went to prison. One of the things I saw you mention, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but you did that 2 years in prison. I saw in the Jamie interview that you said that was the easy part for you, because you had all this other stuff. But I'm wondering, when we're talking about Barry Horn being in prison for so long and doing these hunger strikes, so he was effective from prison. And I wonder, I've never been to prison, but I imagine other than not seeing friends, family, of course, what would be hard for me is feeling like I'm out of the fight. I've been taken out of the fight. What was that like for you for the 2 years? Did you feel like you were still able to do things that were effective for the movement? What do you think?
I wasn't able to. I was literally pretty much banned from communicating with most other activists. There was very little I can do, and there was a lot of threats being held over us, which they actually ended up doing anyway, even if I did what they asked me to do. So one lesson I learned is if I ever go back to prison for any reason, I'm not listening to probation. They can, I'd rather just take the punishment and do whatever I want to do. But no, actually, for me, it was kind of the opposite. It was nice to have 2 years where I could just not do any activism without any guilt.
Right.
While I'm outside, if I stop doing stuff, then I'm just going to beat myself up, because it's well, animals are dying. What are you doing? Stop doing nothing. And and I had that a little bit after I got out, because then I was kind of had all these restrictions, and the movement had been essentially eradicated, and I was trying to find how to get back into it, but there wasn't really anything to get back into. And then this new movement kind of came along that is doing incredible things, but it's very different from what I know. So how do I get into it? Where do I fit into it? And so I had years when I got out where I wasn't really very active, and that was way harder than being in prison. In prison, it's I can't be active, so at least I can focus on my fitness and my health. and
Right.
writing and reading and other things that I just don't ever get a chance to do. So
Yeah.
no, I quite liked that side of it, to be honest. It was nice to
Mhm.
like, I kind of earned a rest. That's how I felt. I've earned a rest.
I would say you definitely earned that rest. And probably, all the reading and stuff and, fitness and everything that you were able to focus on probably did set you up for, like what you're doing now, I'm sure. At least help you out and give you some clarity and all that.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like, it took me a long time to realize this, but I think I feel like I'm in quite a blessed position in a strange kind of way, because I was, heavily involved in the activism that came before the great shutdown of SHAC and the wider movement. And I through that experience, I was lucky enough to have some of the greatest mentors I could have had. I think I had, my friend Don Curry. He coordinated our local group, and like kind of working alongside him, I really learned how to effectively run a dynamic local group. And then I met Greg Avery, one of the co-founders of SHAC, and Natasha and Heather, and and through them I learned how to run an effective pressure campaign. And I was really close friends with Keith Mann for a long time, and
Mhm.
again, one of the greatest animal liberation activists we probably ever had in this country. And to work alongside him and learn from him, like, was such an apprenticeship. And so having all of that kind of combined knowledge, and then I was dragged out of the movement. I came back, there was no movement to re-enter, and time passes, this new movement builds, and I now kind of see, well, actually, like, I have this quite a unique kind of skill set and knowledge base that I want to share with everyone. Like, people
Mhm.
need this information I have. Like, it might not all be relevant to the modern movement, but some of it definitely is. And so I kind of see that, yeah, now, like, I'm kind of lucky to have had the opportunity to experience what came before, but also be active in what's happening now, so that I can bring what's relevant of that knowledge into the modern movement, and make what's happening now, like, even stronger, and certainly a lot stronger than what we had before as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm kind of glad in a weird kind of way, I think, at this point in my life, that this is all kind of panned out how it did, because I think it needed people to kind of survive what happened to
Mhm.
the movement, in order for the next step of the movement. The movement has rebuilt into something incredible, and now I feel there's a space and an opportunity for the next step, which is to rebuild that grassroots movement, to turn what we have into a mass movement. Essentially, that's the
Mhm.
next step, I think. And I feel kind of honored that hopefully I carry some of the knowledge that can be useful to take that step.
Yeah, and even beyond the knowledge that you have of doing actions and stuff, you are a very effective communicator as well. Like, you're a very gifted speaker, very smart and thoughtful, and a great writer as well. This book is incredibly well researched. Like, it's very, there's tons of citation or like, snippets from here and there. Like, you've clearly like done tons of homework on the movement that you lived through, the campaign that you lived through, of course. So since I'm just zigzagging back and forth, let's go back to the very first action, because I believe you said that the first thing that you did was, like, you were inspired by the campaign, and I guess at that time they were targeting the bank that was involved, and you stuck up a sticker. And what I really love about this story, and correct me, I hope I'm not mixing them up, but what I love about this one is, like, I think someone saw you, and then she was like, "Oh, fuck them," and she walked in and was like, "Stop hurting puppies" or something, and left. Did I get that right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. I mean, we were putting up. So I don't know if this is the first thing I did. Me and my brother were definitely putting up stickers regularly, but
Right, right.
um, we had these posters, and I'd probably stolen it from somewhere, but I had this like adhesive spray, and it
Mhm.
was super sticky. But because I grew up in this little town, and there wasn't a movement there, so it was just me, and then what I was reading, and also my brother, but also what we were reading. And what we were reading was the ALF supporters group newsletter, right? So there's all
Mhm.
these pictures of basically paramilitary looking people in balaclavas and headsets and camo, and so I was like, well, that's what animal rights activists look like then, right? So it's like, I was literally on my school lunch break, and I went into the local town. I pulled on this. It was a nuclear fallout suit, and it was camo
Nice.
and a 3-hole balaclava in the middle of the day, just hiding behind a skip, putting this
You
gear
ju
on, and then And then I walk around the corner of the bank. I've pre-sprayed my posters. I go up and I just slap these posters on the window of the bank. And there's these two elderly ladies at the cash machine, like withdrawing money. And by out, they were easily in their 80s. They were like, and they were like looking at me like while I was putting these posters on, in like, just like I was in the IRA, and they're looking at me, and I could hear them talking. I was trying to ignore, but they were like, "What's that young man up to over there?" And they were just watching me, and then like, yeah, just with the confidence, I suppose, that older women often have, they just kind of wandered over to this guy in a balaclava to see what I was doing, and then they read this poster. And I thought they were going to beat me up. I was like, well, what are they going to do? They're going to try to arrest me, like citizens arrest me. And they read it, and they they were like horrified, and they just both of them just stormed into the bank, and just I could just hear them screaming at the bank manager as I like ran off back to school, like stripping off my balaclava and my nuclear fallout suit.
You must have been like blown away by how that turned out, because that's just awesome, and kudos to those women, because that's awesome.
I think, I mean, it's happened a lot throughout my life. I think that I don't think we give the public enough credit. I think, there's a thing, I think maybe I said it to Wayne, but like, I kind of view like most of the general public, they agree with us. Like they're pre-vegan. Like they don't know they agree with us. And a lot of them will very adamantly fight us on the fact that they agree with us. But particularly, when it comes to dogs, which is really the one species that we have the most interaction with, because when we're fighting for human rights or even environmental issues, a lot of the time we're directly affected, or people we care about are directly affected, and that's really what motivates those campaigns. And I think the animal liberation movement is unique, that we don't have any direct connection really with the victims, and it's quite easy, if I step away from this movement, apart from my mental health, my well-being isn't going to be impacted by me stepping away. But we do have that connectivity with dogs. Most of us know a dog, or have lived with a dog, or are aware like of a dog bringing us some kind of positivity. So when people see a dog on a dissection table that isn't there for its own medical treatment or an autopsy over a health issue, like, it's horrifying. It's horrible, as it should be with all animals. But for the general public, seeing a dog like that specifically, we have that connection. And so I think it's not surprising. And that's, for me, when I focus on vivisection issues, it's horribly speciesist. But I do often center dogs, and particularly puppies, around it, because that's how you get people in. Once they see, like, and that's, my book, Your Neighbour Kills Puppies. Like, that's what we used to say on protests outside people's houses. Your neighbour's killing puppies. And yeah, they're also killing fish and mice and rabbits and geese and horses and whatever else whoever else they're killing in these laboratories. But people, the general public, don't care so much about rats and mice and fish and geese. They do care about dogs, and they do care about cats, and maybe to a lesser degree about rabbits and other animals. So if you get them in on the dogs, and then you talk about these other animals, you talk about some of these other procedures, then they become activists, then they become vegan, then they become aware of the whole thing. But it has to start somewhere, and I think you just need to find those points, those little chinks in people's armor, because what we're asking of people, and again we go back to other movements, like you asking people to become an anti-racist campaigner, all you're asking them to do is not be racist. You don't actually have to change anything, just don't be a dickhead. The same with like queer rights or feminism or most other issues. It's like, actually, even with environmentalism, really the main ask is like, we need companies and governments to change. It's not necessarily that people need to make huge changes. But with us, like, we need, if you want to be an animal rights activist, you care about animals, you have to go vegan. And that really means giving up, or at least the perception of giving up, all the food you like. Is the changing your entertainment, where you draw your entertainment, like maybe even changing your job, like being the arsehole at family events. And it's a huge baseline ask, and so just to expect that of people off the bat is huge. So going with the dogs is a much easier way. And so I find that when you are centering these things, and when you find the messaging that kind of resonates, then you do get those moments like with those two women. And I think it's actually something that the right wing are really good at, it's finding those messages that really hit home at people. And I think like the left wing generally has actually kind of dropped the ball on this. And that's why we see Elon Musk and Trump, and why we have Nigel Farage here and the Reform Party and things, is because, like, you know, here, like having these phrases like "stop the boats," it doesn't really mean anything. Like, you know, obviously it's about immigration. They don't want people coming over by boat or whatever. But no, I kind of want to stop those boat crossings because people are dying. I would rather there was open access to, you know, open channels for immigration. But which isn't what the phrase means, but it can kind of resonate with anyone on 1,000 different ways. Once you start getting specific, then people start falling out with each other. But having this kind of vague phrase that just hits people, it's effective. And we're not great at that, I think. And I think we get quite navel-gazy, and I think we get very caught up in what the right wording is from a kind of like a very kind of really like quite an anal perspective. Like, you know, you have to say the right thing, otherwise you're spreading the wrong message. It's like, well, actually, I think we need to say the right thing that helps build our movement. I think that's what's important. And I think, you know, sometimes, you know, that sometimes there is the right and wrong thing to say, but sometimes actually we need to think what is going to resonate with the average blue collar worker, you know, like who reads the tabloids, who watches Saturday like evening entertainment on terrestrial TV, like normal people who are like the most of the people in this country, most people in the US, across Europe. Like, what do we have to say to resonate with those people? And when you hit that, then you do get these moments. And that was something I think SHAC did very well, actually, this kind of tabloidy kind of approach and appealing to working class people. And I think that's one of the reasons it was quite good at drawing people in and getting the public support, to the point that the press hated us, but pretty much whatever they wrote about us, our donations would increase, our memberships would increase, because the public were like, yeah, like, fuck those guys that are killing dogs. Like, like there's nothing you can say that's going to change that. And yeah, so it was an empowering thing as a kid, and it was funny. It's obviously a story I remember, but actually it certainly wasn't isolated as things went on. And I think that's something we really need to think about, how we can get back to that messaging, how we stop pandering, I suppose, to ourselves or to like middle class, literate, not highbrow kind of people. Like that's not the market we need to. I mean, we need that market as well, but we need to be thinking more broadly, I think, about how we get to the public, how we convince them.
Well, I think your analysis of why we have Trump and Musk and all these people is pretty dead on, because I think you're right that the left is just kind of atrocious at messaging. It's almost like the left is like trying to win the debate while the right is trying to win the framing of it. I saw this clip that Sean Hannity, who's a Fox News host in America, had a PETA campaigner on his show. And he kept asking her, do you have a problem with me eating a burger or a steak? And the PETA person, to her credit, she was not trying to go down that route, but he was really trying to make it about, this is my personal choice and that sort of thing. And a lot of the resistance I see on the left from like big YouTube left people is like, yeah, they want the societal change. They want the work done for them, which is kind of pathetic. Honestly, it's kind of pathetic that they can't do anything themselves without having, but I think that's maybe like a kind of like something that has been part of the left, is that we're pushing for societal changes. So when you ask someone to do something in their personal life, like you said, it's easy to not be homophobic. It's easy to not be racist, and you know, you just don't do that, you know. But so and like you said, dogs are, while it may be sort of speciesist, that is the chink in the armor for sure. Like when Wayne was on trial for, you know, or about to go on trial for rescuing beagles, we were excited because we knew that the public was on our side on this. Like it doesn't mean he wouldn't have been convicted or served time or whatever, but we knew that we had the moral high ground on that. So as we always do, but I'm just saying on that, like the public agrees with us. So one of the things, one of the things that really struck me about the campaign that you were describing is just sort of the ingenuity of the people. Like, one of the examples I really liked was like during one of these sieges of, like, you know, the beagles or cats, I can't remember which, but anyway, like some people had rescued animals and they were going out, and I really liked the quick thinking that everybody, you described everybody like held their sweatshirts so that it looked like everyone had a dog or a cat, so that the police couldn't identify who has the animals. And that, I mean, it seems simple to me in retrospect, but like that was quick thinking and just brilliant. Um, Stuff like that, and also going after the financial institutions, and that is the part that was kind of insanely brilliant, and almost I'm blown away by how the campaign was able to learn all those details and how they did that. But anyway, just the, I don't know what question I was going with that, but just sort of praise for like how smart people were during this campaign. Um, yeah, but I do feel like we've lost that in some respect. I'm not saying people in the movement aren't smart, because they are. But yeah, those were just some brilliant tactics that played out.
I think in terms of the overall strategy of the campaign and a lot of the like deep diving research and stuff, I mean, I think credit has to be given to the fact that Greg Avery was a genius. Like, I think people like that don't come along very often. So even where, you know, I don't know even if SHAC as a whole can take like total credit in that. Like, that was Greg. Like, but him doing that inspired all of us to do that. So, you know, I was like an 18-year-old, like scruffy, crusty punk, like reading the Financial Times because Greg inspired me to learn how businesses work. And it's, you know, it's clearly something that stuck with me for the rest of my life. But no, it was like the levels that they and we would go to get this information and stuff. You know, like there was one time I remember Greg and Natasha, his partner, they dressed up in very fancy clothes and went off to meet some city bankers, like the, you know, top people from JP Morgan and Citibank and some others, and they had like pinhole cameras, and then they went to like talk to these top bankers, and, you know, like asking like, oh, you know, we just like inherited X million pounds from auntie's estate and we're looking to invest it, like, oh, what do you recommend? And they'd go through, so they were like, oh, what about this Huntingdon Life Sciences? Is that, you know, their share price is low at the moment, is that, and just to get like these bankers like candid like reactions about Huntingdon Life Sciences share price, and, you know, they were priceless. They were like, do not touch them with a barge pole, like do not go near that firm. So then we could learn, like, you know, not only is it quite funny to get that information, but we also know that these banks are not recommending the shareholding to their clients, and, you know, that's useful information. And I know when I spoke to people from SHAC USA, like they would phone up the SEC, someone at the SEC, and they initially, they started this conversation like, I'm a college student, I'm doing this paper on whatever it is, and you know, what can you tell me about market makers? What's a market maker? And this person in the SEC would go, oh yeah, that's great, like this is what a market maker is. They, you know, they're an intermediary buying, selling shares or whatever, and then they're like, great, we kind of know what this is, we kind of know, and they would kind of get information on how to like find them, or what information they needed, who ran them and stuff. And then a month later, they'd be like, a few weeks later, they'd be like, oh no, like now this has happened. Now like Huntingdon Life Sciences has been moved to the grey markets. What does that mean? And they'd phone up this person in the SEC, like, oh hi, I'm still doing my paper. And like 2 years later, they're still phoning up the same person at the Security Exchanges Commission, like, hi, still doing that paper 2 years on. Can you tell me like this thing now? And so yeah, there was a lot of effort went into, and, you know, like particularly I think SHAC USA, you know, they were like college kids. They were like, they didn't know this stuff, but they would teach themselves, and again we would inspire each other. And I think that's the most important thing I think we can take from all of this, is things don't happen in a vacuum. And so, if, you know, if we want to see these things happening again, someone has to make these things happen again, and who is there if not us? Like the old ALS thing, if not you, who? If not now, when? Like, and that's very
you.
true.
Yeah.
Yes,
you watching.
And also us. Like,
right.
It's up to all of us to make these things happen. If you want something to happen, and I think social media has done something quite. I mean, there's a lot of positives with it. There's a lot of negatives with it, but something that that it has fostered more generally than just the animal rights movement is this kind of idea that everything has to be critiqued, that everyone's opinion matters on everything, even if they don't have an opinion, they just want to kind of, and it's never a positive opinion, is it?
Right.
And so what that has kind of allowed in the movement, especially where there's this kind of areas of dead space maybe in the movement where things aren't happening that could be, and maybe we have lost some, particularly around the grassroots, that kind of dynamism and that energy and that passion is kind of, there's this kind of void and no one's really quite sure how to fill it, I think. And what that has kind of given way to in a lot of areas is just this idea that the best thing we can do is to be critiquing everything. Like, like it's important that we critique our movement. It's important that we critique every action. And in some ways it is important. Like if I do an action, I think it's very important that if I have time and space and energy to do so, that I think, was that the best use of my time? Could I have done it better? What went wrong? What went right? Like that's healthy. What I think isn't healthy is when some people are trying to do something and other people are just sitting in an internet comment box like, well, actually, I think this, or that person's just doing this for the money or the ego or whatever it is. And it's like,
yeah, and they do it in that voice too. They always have that voice.
Yeah. But who cares? Who cares? Like, who cares why an action is happening? Who cares if it's the best action? If you think you can do better, do better.
Do it.
But like, if I'm a pig in an abattoir, if I'm a rabbit in a laboratory, if someone's coming through that door to get me out, I could not give a flying shit if they're wearing a mask, if they're following proper security protocol, if they're doing it for their ego, if they're doing it for their Instagram likes. I don't care. Like, I don't care. I don't care who's funding them. I don't care about any of that. I just want that person coming through the door. So if someone's coming through that door, then let's like celebrate them. And if they're not, let's be that person.
Right.
And if
I agree.
If we think someone's doing it in the wrong way, cool. At least they're doing it.
Yeah.
Go and do it better. Show us how to do it better.
I know. We have a lot of people in the movement who spend a lot of time criticizing others in the movement, and I really try to stay away from that as much as I can, even if I thought, which I honestly never do. Like, it's almost never that I thought, oh, nah, you shouldn't have done that. It's usually the only times I think about that is when someone's criticizing. I'm like, well, yeah, like you said, do it yourself. I don't care if somebody's handing out a leaflet. I'm not handing out that leaflet. They're handing out the leaflet. Thank you for handing out the leaflet. I know that those can inspire change. Do I think like going onto the farm and rescuing the pig is probably better? Sure. Yeah. But they're not. They're handing out the leaflet. I'd rather them doing that than sitting on their sofa, doing fuck all, So I like what you said earlier. You had mentioned, this shouldn't be a spectator sport. And here we are making YouTube for people spectating. But, we want people to be joining. I remember this thing. It was like an anonymous thing that was written on the internet, maybe not on the internet, but ages ago, from some anonymous ALF guy that was like, stop supporting the ALF. That was the title. It was clickbaity, but it was basically saying, we don't want your support. We want your participation, basically. So, I mean, the point of conversations like this is hopefully to inspire, and we learn, of course, but yeah, there's just too few of us that care, unfortunately. Although, as you did mention, the public does care more than we give them credit for. So how do we change this? Because I feel like social media is part of the reason why this has become a spectator sport. You can just go and see anything you want, and somebody's doing it typically, and you can just go and click the like and feel like you've done the activism. I'm not saying those aren't good things to do. But how do we get people from their phones to the real life? I'm sure you've grappled with that.
I've grappled with it. I've also, I think, problem solved it. I think it's easier than people realize. Fundamentally, I think to create a culture, you need to create a culture, and to do that, there is legwork involved. But I said, what I feel is missing in the movement is this kind of local group network, and there's this grassroots autonomy, and I believe that. And so what we've done locally, me and my friend Nikki, we've relaunched our local group. It's actually relaunched the group that I got involved with like nearly 30 years ago, and the same name and everything. And what we did, and this is, I hope does inspire people. What we did is we basically contacted everyone that was active, like everyone we were aware of that was active locally, because there's a lot of things happening. And, you know, and it's important to be clear, when I talk about these local groups, I'm talking about autonomous community-based organizing, as opposed to a chapter of a national or international organization that is single issue. So we spoke to, like, you know, the people organizing those chapters, as well as like the local autonomous activist people who were doing things locally, you know, off their own back, but maybe on, you know, a fairly small scale or a single issue or whatever it might be. And we spoke to all of those people and invited them all to a meeting as an umbrella collective, Dorset Animal Action, an umbrella collective of all the groups and individuals that are active for animals in Dorset. And I think we had like 30 or so people like attend the first meeting, which was, you know, more than we expected. And there's a few things that from that first meeting that were really interesting, because I think, you know, like you say, it's very easy to feel there isn't much stuff happening in an area, and that's certainly how I felt locally. I was aware we had a We the Free chapter, and there was some day vigils happening, and, you know, some outreach tables every now and then and stuff. But it kind of felt like there wasn't really anything happening, and so we went around the room to these 30 people, and just like we gave them a list of questions. They could choose how many or few they wanted to answer. Just to introduce themselves, like, this is my name, this is the organizations I work with. And as we went round in the, you know, this little area we live in, this quite rural area of the UK, small kind of forgotten part of the UK, we went around this room, and the amount of stuff that was happening locally was phenomenal. And the amount of like quite like, you know, senior organizers in some of the national organizations even that were based locally was, it kind of, and we were all sat there like, this is ridiculous. There's so much happening, but we don't, like, none of us know that this is all happening. So then what we did at the end of the session is we kind of left a space, a half-hour space of kind of dead time, where we had like snacks and, you know, it's just kind of like socialize. And what was amazing and surprising for me really was, I expected everyone just to kind of retreat back into their silos and kind of retreat back into their kind of safety net of who they knew. But it was the opposite, where people who had only done outreach were hearing about hunt sabotage for the first time. They were just like gaggling to the hunt sabs, like, how do we get involved? How do we get involved? The hunt sabs were like, we're sabbing on Saturdays, but like, you know, what day are the vigils happening? What day is the outreach happening? And suddenly we're getting this cross-pollination of different groups. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you kind of get this idea that these people in these like local kind of chapters, that's all they want to do. But that's only because that's all they know. Once this kind of like world opens up to them, it's like, you know, wait, what? I can do what? And then off the back of that meeting, where we're there talking and, you know, very proactively talking about this idea of autonomous activism, one guy decided that he was going to go and stand outside our local sea life centre, Oceanarium, with a placard. And he went every Saturday for several weeks. And then someone else joined him, and his partner joined him, and then it grew until we had, like, you know, sometimes like 20 people now outside the Oceanarium. I'm like, you know, and they have like weekly pickets, and now it's spread into like a pressure campaign where they're targeting the local hotels that advertise for them and you know, do deals with them, promotions. Where there's a petition to try and get the council to revoke their licensing, and there's plans for like publicity stunts for people in costumes, and, you know, it's grown into this thing. And at the same time, we now have regular protests against a local company or a company locally that do clinical waste for a dog breeder for vivisection, and they have like protests every single week. And you know, it's not always the same people, so sometimes you have 20 people doing this protest and 20 people doing that protest. Just for Christmas, like, a bunch of turkeys got liberated, like, under the name of the local group. There's shooting towers getting pulled down, there's outreaches happening all the time. And then we've got to have 3 hunt sab groups already, but all of them have reported that like more people are coming because more people know. And we now have a local newsletter that brings all of this information together. And it's, you know, it's really vibrant, and it just shows that people want to be active. Like, people do want to be active, they just don't know how to be. And the problem is, as I said earlier, if you contact a lot of these groups, at best they will say like, oh, here's how you join the local chapter of our organization. And a lot of these local chapters, and I'm definitely not disparaging them, we need all of this. Absolutely, we need a vibrant ecosystem. Like you say, the giving out the flyer is just as important as anything else. Like, we need all of it. We need more of everything, not less of anything. But a lot of these chapters, like what they're actually doing is a tactic, a protest tactic. So, you know, like something like the 3-minute movie challenge, for example, that's not a campaign, obviously. I don't think anyone would argue it is. That's a tactic. That's an outreach tactic, and it works very effectively. A vigil, for example, say vigil, that's a tactic. Supermarket sit-in that Animal Rising do, that's a tactic. Like none of these are campaigns. None of these are even strategies. They're just tactics, and any local group can take on all of those tactics, or none of them, or completely different ones. And it's very empowering when you kind of can see how this really works to funnel recruitment for a start, because you're working in your local community. People then know how to recruit people from the local university or the local colleges, or just the public in general, or other local campaigns and issues and causes. We can help with the pro-Palestine protests. We can help with the women's march. We can help with the Black Lives Matter events and stuff, and then they can help with us. Like, and it does work. Like, you do get this cross-pollination, and so you can kind of grow a movement from the bottom up. I mean, you need to grow a movement from the bottom up. And then it means that when a national organization needs help with something, suddenly you have these kind of like around the country, these pools of people where there's like hundreds of people ready or willing to help, because they're active all the time. They're not just waiting like, I only do my outreach like, every third Sunday of the month or whatever. And yeah, so it's important on so many levels. That's really how we build a movement. But also I'm not going to say it destroys burnout, but it certainly mitigates burnout if you're no longer just doing the same thing week after. And some people still do and they enjoy it, and that's great. But for a lot of people, doing the same thing week after week after week after week is a recipe for burnout, especially if you don't see tangible results. Like, and so now it's like, well, actually, I've been doing my outreaches every week, and I need a break. But my break is now that I can go hunt savage. Or I can go and do a vigil, or I can go and do an oceanarian protest, or I can protest vivisection. And we have things happening like every day almost locally. There's something going on, like from like a vegan meetup to a liberation. There's something happening all the time. And it gives people can find their place. Like, where are you comfortable? Where do you feel safe? Where do you feel that you can make the best change? Where is your skill set? What can you contribute? And then you're building leadership into people as well. we make a point at our meetings where we share who's chairing it. Like it shifts around the group, so someone different is chairing it each time. Well, we have a pair of people, so one of the people from the last time will team up with someone new for the next one, and then the new person will team up with a new person. So there's always new people chairing it. When we do protests, we'll offer the megaphone round. We'll do chants so people can all join in. We'll have stickers people can put up and chalk, and you see people almost radicalizing themselves because they can find different things they can do each time, and you build a community, you destroy burnout, and you build a movement, and that's what we do. And it all just starts with having a meeting. It all just starts with contacting people local to you, and ideally, like, people are already active, everyone who's locally active, whether you agree with them or not, and just getting them in a room together and say, what can we do? What can we do to benefit all of us and to benefit the animal?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned sort of the difference between tactics and a campaign, and it sounds like what you've, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you have wanted to do is sort of like bring all these tactics together into something that could get a tangible result. Would that be like a fair characterization?
It's part of it. I think at this point in what we're doing, it's not necessarily because we're not asking, like, we the free to change what they're doing. We're not asking them to like focus on a different focus. Like, that's happening at another end of the movement, and that is happening. Like, there is my good friend Layla is particularly involved in helping the NGOs and large organizations sit around it and work together on kind of shared goals and movement wide goals, which at the moment is focused around the RSPCA, our biggest welfare charity, who are doing a lot of welfare washing stuff. So that's happening there, but it's more about showing people that activism isn't confined to a single tactic, and it's not confined to any single organization or any single campaign. Activism is what we make it, and it can be as diverse and beautiful and exciting and inspiring and imaginative as we want it to be. And I think that's the really key thing at this stage, is just to rebuild that culture that you have the power to do whatever you want, and collectively we have the power to change the world.
Right. Yeah, I feel like we've sort of had it bred into us or something, or this idea hammered into us that we are powerless. And that's the thing when we were talking about the right and the left that really irks me. I'm a progressive. I consider myself very much part of the left. But the thing that bothers me about the left is that focus on the, like, it's got to be the system, that I can't do anything. Like, it's almost this like learned helplessness, like that we describe the animals who like go along with their what their captors want them to do, the learned helplessness. I hate seeing that in people. Like, I feel when I went vegan, I felt very much empowered. Like, I was like, oh, this is an issue that I have direct control over. And I realize it's not as simple as that. I don't think, like, I would love for people to go vegan, right? But I don't think vegan is enough. I think we have to do more than be vegan, but vegan's a great start. So I don't think that's all it takes, but it's very empowering to me. Let me go back again. So your book, it's describing all these things happening, and it's honestly, it's so much happening. It's like a whirlwind of events. Every now and then you write in the first person, and you'll be talking about things that you took part in. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was you talked about the Harlan Interfauna place that you snuck into, and you had tried to free these dogs, and you realized while you were doing that you couldn't get them out, and you said that's haunted you like to this day, or to the point where you were writing the book. Can you tell me a little bit about that event? I'm sorry to take it to a dark place, but it was really
No, I mean,
compelling
it's
to
an
read.
important part of my story, I suppose. But it's yeah, so it was called Harlan Interfauna. It's now MBR Acres, and anyone that's following the British movement will probably be aware of Camp Beagle and MBR Acres, puppy factory that breeds 2,000 dogs every year for the UK research industry. But yeah, back then it was owned by a different company, Harlan Interfauna. And I was on a protest, and yeah, it was my local group, Dorset Animal Action version 1, the old version, and we turned up, and basically we always turn up early. We were always late, or we were early, or we were in the wrong place, and we were chaotic. And so we turned up early. We had this big blue minibus that someone had painted a big Animal Liberation Front logo on the roof. So obviously the police are always, they knew where we were because there's a big ALF logo going around the countryside. And so we pulled up on the side of the road, this big blue minibus, and we were waiting for like 100 other people to arrive. It was like a day of mobile protest. So you do a protest here, just before the police arrive, you move on to the next place and kind of keep the police on their toes and have really lively protests at a number of locations.
And real
so
quick, was that?
we turned up.
Sorry, just real quick. I was just wondering, was that ALF painted on top of the bus to be like a diversion, or was it just like, you know, like
I think someone had
send
drunk
the
too much
bus.
cider.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
It was. I think 2 people found it hilarious, and the rest of us were really annoyed about it.
Okay, gotcha.
But what it meant was we turned up at Harlan Interfauna, where they breed these dogs, and we turned up early. And so we were parked on the side of this grass verge in the middle of the countryside, waiting for 100 people to turn up. And obviously the police know there's protests happening, and this is an obvious thing. So there's a couple of cop cars there, and obviously they saw us straight away and they came over. So we got out and we walking around the facility, just like 3 of us trying to work out, whether else stayed in the coach. We were just like, what do we do? Oh, wait, let's just walk around. And I was walking around and I was looking at the fences, and I'd had it kind of bred into me, like you said, like this idea that this place was impenetrable. And I was looking at these barbed wire, these razor wire fences. They're like 8 foot tall, but I was like, I can climb that. I know I can climb that. Like my friend had shown me how to climb razor wire, and I was like, I can climb that fence. But there's a cop like right here. So I kind of bided my time and tried to just look like I was just being sad and thoughtful. And then the cop behind me suddenly got a call on his radio, like, there's 100 people at the front gate, like, get round there now. And so he kind of looks at me, and I was like, all 9 stone of me at the time. And he looked at me, he was like, yeah. And he just sprinted around the corner. The second he was like going around the corner, I just ran for the fence and climbed over these 2 8-foot razor wire fences. And just sprinted. I don't have it anymore. I wish I did, but I had the CCTV because obviously I got arrested. I was sprinting like, and the CCTV is so funny. Like I'm just sprinting across this like courtyard because I'm inside this thing. There's going to be like security. There's going to be police. There's going to be staff. Like I'm going to get rugby tackled. So I'm just sprinting. There's a pile of crates. I jump up these crates. I jump onto the roof, and I'm on the roof. I'm like, I'm probably like, so I'm on the roof and I'm looking around, and it's like, where is everyone? Like, there's no one in this facility. It's like dead. And then I see like the people outside the fence, there's 100 people that have turned up and seen me on the roof, and they're just, I could see one of my friends just throwing himself against the razor wire trying to like get through the fences, and everyone's just like, and it's just crazy, like police helicopter overhead, and everyone just like, yeah, like fighting with the police to try and get in to try and help me with these dogs. And so I was there for a while. I didn't really know what to do. So eventually I didn't want to get off the roof because I was like, I'm going to get arrested the second I set foot on the floor. But I was like, eventually I was like, there's no one here. So I started walking around the roof trying to work out the layout from the top. And there's this kind of channel between two buildings, like an alleyway, an open alleyway. And I could hear barking from down there. So I jumped down into this alleyway. And along so behind me is a brick wall. In front of me, it's just rows of bars, pens. It kind of like I guess, you know, what we see on telly, like a US drunk tank, that kind of like bars floor to ceiling kind of thing. But it's these concrete pens that are quite long and narrow, and each one probably has maybe 10, 12 dogs in. Beagles, obviously what they use for testing predominantly. They're all beagles, and they're living in these concrete pens. There's like nothing in them other than like a literal sprinkling of sawdust that's just sodden with urine. There's like feces everywhere. The urine's running out of the cages at my feet. There's like a little concrete bench at the back that is like more concrete. There's nothing for them to like really like have any comfort, or there's no stimulation or anything like that. And yeah, so I took a moment. It was like fairly horrifying. Like, what do I do? And my first instinct was to check the cage. Like, can I get these dogs out? And I could see people, like before I jumped down, I could see people doing exactly what you said, what had happened at concert, where they were like bundling up their jackets ready to like, in case I got someone out.
Oh wow. Yeah.
But like all the cages were padlocked shut. One of my friends had actually climbed in a couple of years before and done the same thing, and he'd let all the dogs out into the courtyard, and so since then they got padlocks and everything, so I couldn't get into them. I didn't have any tools on me. This was a spur of the moment thing, so I had no way of getting to these dogs, and most of them were just running to the back of their pens and like literally just shaking with fear. I could see one dog had tried to chew her way out of the bars, and like literally she just had like no teeth, just like blood running out of her mouth. There was just one dog that was I suppose brave enough to come over and see me. I don't know if she was younger or just generally more trusting or what it was, but you know, these dogs were terrified of human beings. Like seeing me was terrifying. They were literally wetting themselves with fear. There's one dog, like she kind of came over quite hesitantly at first. She kind of came over and I put my hand through and I gave her like, you know, made a little fuss of her, and then yeah, like I was just kind of bonding with her. I was, you know, giving her ear rubs and kind of like just giving her attention, and you know, she was getting more and more relaxed and happy, and I ended up, I was in there for 2 hours in the end, and every now and then I popped back onto the roof to see what was happening and then jumped that down. I ended up being in there for 2 hours, and yeah, obviously I kind of bonded with that dog, and you know, at some point I could hear the police coming into the compound, so I knew I was going to be arrested. So, you know, I looked into her eyes, and yeah, I just made her this promise that I wouldn't stop fighting until we'd ended that industry. And yeah, it was I moved right to the end of the corridor when the police came in, and I made sure they had to see the dogs as they came to arrest me. They had to see what I'd seen. Like I was, you know, I had even now I'm struggling to hold it back, but like I was floods of tears, and I was like, if you're going to arrest me for being in here, you have to see this. And so I stood right at the end. So they had to walk all the way past them, and you know, they didn't give a shit. And they arrested me, and I just went limp and made them drag me out. And I was like, I want you to look at these dogs. Like this is what you're supporting.
Yeah.
And they dragged me out, and arrested me for it. And I think when we were talking about the prison stuff earlier, like the prison bit was fine. When I got out of prison, I didn't really know where my place was in the movement. There wasn't really a movement to find my place in at that point. That was the hardest thing, feeling that I'd broken that promise. because yeah, it's probably the most important promise I've made in my life. And she's dead. Obviously she's dead. She'd have died weeks, months after I met her, like dissected on some bastard's table. And I intended to keep that promise. Like, I meant it with every part of my being. I meant it. And yeah, it's so when the protest resumed outside MBR Acres like a few years ago with Camp Beagle and the animal rising rescues and everything else, like it's been so, I suppose, cathartic, but important for me on a personal level, beyond like the individuals involved. On a personal level, like I want to honor my promise to that dog. Like, I intend to honor my promise to that dog. And yeah, I intend to do everything I can to end the vivisection industry, and obviously beyond that, but specifically, like, yeah, that's that. I intend to keep that promise.
Well, thanks for sharing that story, because it's so beautiful and heartbreaking. And yeah, I mean, I would say, for one, like I feel like you're honoring that promise all the time. And like the book is part of that promise. All your actions, your organization is still part of that promise. But I hear you. And and I talked to a lot of people where they have that moment with just one being like that. I was talking to a friend recently who was in tears during a vigil, and he told me that it was because, and I didn't know this story until he told me, it was because one of the pigs came up and was like, he touched their little snout, and he had this bond with that animal before they went off to the slaughterhouse, and it kind of just hit him in that moment. So yeah, it must be like, one, it's like really inspiring to have this moment and to make this promise to an animal. And I didn't realize when you told that story, like when I read it in your book, it sounded to me like you were just in there for a few moments. I didn't realize you were in there for 2 hours. That's wild. And yeah, that must have been horrifying. And one of the things that struck me was what you said about how the dogs were terrified and they all ran away from you. It was just showing, and you said in the book that I knew everything I needed to know about how those employees were treating those dogs by their reaction to me when I came in there. While you were in there in the 2 hours and you had this bond with the one beagle, or it was beagle, yeah. So did the others have any curiosity, or did they just stay far away?
They pretty much just stayed back. There, a couple
Yeah.
kind of came a little bit forward to see what was happening, but I had no kind of physical interaction with any of those. None of them came close enough for that. No.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. Well, and then and didn't you say one of your friends was like also like tackled in that moment too? Didn't you have a
Yeah,
friend
so
come
when I
in?
was arrested, I was dragged out, and
Mm,
one of my friends who had turned up on the ALF bus with me, he was yeah, a guy in his 50s. He literally, he saw me being dragged out, and because we've discussed many times, I'm kind of a dick when it comes to authority. So I always, like, if I'm getting arrested, I'll just go kind of as limp as possible, just to be annoying,
yeah.
and then like chant or whatever I'm doing. So I was being dragged out all floppy. So he just ran over to make sure I was okay. Okay, he just came over, was like, like, Tom, you okay? You okay? And this cop just turned around, just punched him, like sucker punched him in the gut, and absolutely took the wind out of him, like floored him to the floor. He was
Jesus.
completely white, and then he's just there, like, like choking, and they're just tying him up, and he got arrested as well.
Wow. I love the detail that you made the cops walk in to see the dogs, and even though they didn't care, but that's a great detail. Wow, like that. So you must have thought about this moment many times, I guess, over the years. Something that you still think about. Well, I just feel like a huge amount of gratitude to you for being in these places and putting yourself on the line and going in there like that. That, to me, when I said at the very beginning why there needs to be another term, we can't just call everybody a legend. There's got to be another term for a Tom Harris, legend with a capital L or something. And I know I'm embarrassing you, but it just you're a real life hero. I appreciate that. And so yeah, this book is amazing. So everybody should read this book. I always ask this to my guests too, like about what we should be reading. So since I'm reading your book, for obviously read this book. But when I finish your book, what should I read next, Tom?
Oh, that's a good question. I think something I often draw inspiration from is actually something that I'm stealing this from Peter Young, who was a US ALF prisoner at one point, is this idea, I think, that I feel like we kind of almost confine ourselves to drawing inspiration from ourselves. And there is a lot of information out there about the animal liberation movement. There's a lot to look up on. There was the Talon conspiracy website, which I was down earlier. Hopefully it's not down for good, because that kind of compiled a lot of the old magazines and newsletters and stuff of the movement.
Oh, really?
So if that comes back, that's a very important resource for our movement.
What is that?
The Talon conspiracy.
Talon conspiracy, like talon, like claws.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But I would say, I think it's important to look outside of our movement for inspiration. I think something we often, say, like, especially around the vivisection industry, but maybe even more so around other places, like we have this idea that these places are like fortresses and we can't get in. But then bank robbers are doing it all the time. Like jewelry thieves are doing it all the time. So why aren't we drawing inspiration from them? If people are willing to take these risks and come up with these incredible, creative, ingenuitive ideas of how to take these kind of actions for greed and no other reason than greed, then why aren't we doing it for justice and liberation and all the right reasons? And so I think there's a lot of inspiration to be drawn from outside of our movement. So yeah, that's what I would do. I would recommend true crime around capers and crimes and heists and things like that. I think that there's a lot to learn from those kind of areas, and also from other social movements. I think my biggest, or one of my biggest political inspirations is Fred Hampton and Bobby Lee. What they did with the Rainbow Coalition in Chicago, where they, we talk about, like, some of the animal rights groups not cooperating and not working together, and they managed to convince not just, like, the Latinx community through the Young Lords to work with the Black Panthers, but also the Young Patriots, who were kind of self-described rednecks, like these like second generation Appalachian migrants into Chicago, who that had the Confederate flag as their logo, who in some cases were openly racist, and they're suddenly platforming the Black Panthers and working with the Black Panthers because of the work that Bobby Lee and Fred Hampton and others put in. And I think that's just incredible. If the Black Panthers can work alongside racists, then there's literally no part of our movement that shouldn't be aligning and working together and looking for shared goals and shared objectives and shared aims. And so, yeah, so I think that's all very important. I think looking at how these kind of, how people organize in times of necessity, how the French resistance, the German resistance operated in times of necessity. I think that's great. But within our movement, I think Keith Mann's book, From Dusk Till Dawn, is a very thorough account of the British animal liberation movement, and also touches on a lot of international actions as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Yeah, I didn't know about that book, Keith Mann. You are the second person who has talked about Fred Hampton that I've talked to. So that's someone we should obviously learn from as well. And yeah, you mentioned Peter Young too. And yeah, that was honestly the first book that I read that really started to get me interested in this stuff was Peter Young's Liberate, which is basically like a collection of his writings and speeches and that sort of thing. And yeah, like you said, he talks pretty much at great length about drawing inspiration from other movements and from, like you said, capers and all the true crime stuff. Yeah. Yeah. He even had like kind of a long laundry list of books. Read this. And it was some of the stuff was just about like, how to like message, how to go viral, how to all this kinds of stuff. So for what I would recommend is people to read your book, Your Neighbor Kills Puppies, and check out Liberate by Peter Young and get that reading list from him. And this Keith Mann book, which I didn't know about, is I'm super excited to read. So yeah, what do you do? So I know you're a tattoo artist as well, and so that's something that you do and love, I'm sure. And But what are the things that you get into, like outside of animal rights and the serious topics, and how do you like decompress and escape from all this?
I'm a figure skater.
You are?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah.
Whoa, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's probably an unusual one, but yeah, no, that's yeah, it's very freeing, I think, being on the
Wow.
ice and having that kind of space and being alone with my thoughts. I think I need if I have a distraction, if I need a distraction, it needs to be something I have to focus on. If
Mm,
I'm not fully focused, then it's not a distraction for me. And sometimes, yeah, my brain just needs to switch off. And for me, just that kind of the sound and the sensation and everything of being on the ice, coupled with the fact that if I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, I'm gonna hurt myself.
mm,
I think, yeah, that's my main way of decompressing. I think I also just like being out in nature. I think I do a lot of my best thinking and plotting and stuff when I'm out in nature, either running or walking.
mhm.
Um, walking with Niffler, my dog. So they're kind of two ends of the spectrum. If I need to kind of turn my brain off, then figure skating. If I need to consolidate an idea, then walking or running.
Mm. And you mentioned the ADHD is, I guess that's part of it. Like you said, like I really need to be focused on something. Is that part of it? Do you feel limited in that way?
That is my superpower, I think.
Yeah. Mm,
I can focus on a lot of things at once, but if there's something that's like in my brain, like the only way to switch that off is to switch my brain onto something else. Like if I can't just like meditate or like have a nap or relax or sit down and like, because if I'm sat down, I'll be thinking about this and I'll be thinking about that and I'll be thinking about this. And so if I need to turn my brain off for any reason, then I need to
mhm.
focus on something other than what I'm focusing on right now.
Right, right. Well, so we've talked nearly 2 hours. Since I haven't finished your book, I'm wondering, are there things that I'm missing that I should really highlight, or is it good? Like, are there, or I mean, obviously we want people to read the book also to learn some of this stuff too. But beyond that too, are there things that you wanted to talk about or discuss that you wanted to get into in the interview?
I think, I mean, there's a couple of things for me, like in writing the book. There's like reasons I wrote the book, and
Hmm.
and around that, obviously, like putting a highlight back onto animal testing is a huge part of it, because when I started, that had actually kind of been broadly forgotten by our movement for various reasons, some of which probably made clear in the book. But obviously, what Wayne's been doing, with what Camp Beagle are doing, with what Animal Rising doing, is very much now back on the agenda, which is really like affirming to see and really positive to see. So that's really good. There's also a lot of lessons in there. So, you mentioned that I got to prison. Like, I got a 5-year sentence. Some of my friends got far more serious sentences than that. And
Mm,
I really kind of, so, some of that, whether it was avoidable or not, I don't know. But some of what happened to us is being repeated with other movements and other campaigns. And so I really just want to kind of put those lessons out for people to kind of hopefully help build that resilience. I certainly don't want to
mhm,
deter anyone from doing anything, quite the opposite, but hopefully to kind of help people just notice when things aren't going the direction we maybe want them to.
mhm,
But also, like, you mentioned about the pacing of the book, but a really important thing for me was to convey throughout, like consistently throughout the book, how we felt as we lived it. And I think
mm,
often you look back on moments and events and you think, oh yeah, like actually that was a lot bigger than I kind of realized. I think with the SHAC campaign, like we knew we were making history when we were doing it.
mhm,
Like we knew in the moment. And so that feeling that we were going to win, it wasn't just like, oh, I hope we win this. It was like, we're going to win, and if we put enough in, we will win.
mhm.
And we had that, we literally woke up every day, and even after people were being raided and dragged off and thrown into prison, we still knew we were like days and winning. If we thought we were going to lose, we'd have stopped. Like, we knew we were going to
Mhm.
win. And I hope that follows through. I think it does, and I hope that follows through in the book, that feeling, that energy, and that inspiration, where, like, you say you read it and there's all these like amazing stories, but we were reading them as they were happening. We were like, oh my god,
Mhm.
what have they done in Seattle? Like, what have they done in Russia? Like,
Yeah.
that was really like inspiring to us, and I hope that comes across, that level of inspiration, how the actions you take can have such a big impact on other people. Like if
Right.
And I think that's very important. It's not just about us taking these actions because we feel they're the right thing to do and everything else, which is the most important thing, but also we need to be inspiring other people. And if you want to inspire people to take action, you don't do it through criticizing them or tearing other people down or telling other people what they should be doing. You do it by showing. You show them how these things can be, how a protest, and for me, if I go on a protest still, like it's hard for me to not climb on something or jump a fence or do something, get into an office. Like someone has to tell me not to for that not to happen. Like it's kind of second nature, and then there's rarely any kind of consequence to it. Someone asks me to move and I move, and that's that. And I think it's just bringing those things back into protest, that you don't have to just do the same thing you've always been doing. You can mix it up, you can make it exciting, you can twist it up. So yeah, that was a big part in the writing of it. And as I say, I think that comes across. I hope that comes across. And also the lengths that the government went to end us, like it was, due to a very specific set of circumstances, which is, followed through in the book, that narrative. But the fact that the police had a professional informant, Adrian Radford, who literally set us up and had us all sent to prison based off of his lies and his planted evidence. And we're still trying to seek appeals for our convictions because we don't believe they were lawful. We don't believe we were fairly convicted. But so that's still ongoing, and that's hopefully we can get that, and we can use that opportunity again to leverage the narrative around animal testing. But yeah, I just really my biggest thing to people is just to do something. I think you talked about how we've been like told that we don't have this power in ourselves, that we have to defer it through politicians or through petitions or whatever it might be. And I think that the two things I focus on, the pressure campaigning and also the grassroots movement and local community organizing, both of those things are just, for me, the best way that we can realize our power. I think the SHAC campaign showed how collectively as individuals we can, basically a bunch of teenagers, particularly in the USA, or you people in the early 20s, and in the UK, like a slightly wider age range, but still just kind of a disparate group of friends can make billionaires cry and make politicians rethink everything, and just create these waves of terror throughout Westminster and through Capitol Hill. So that power, I don't think there's anything like it. I don't think there's any other way for a normal person without political connections or whatever else to make that kind of an impact, where you can literally close a company. Like you and I today start a campaign that can close a company. We don't need funding. We don't even really need any like supporters or volunteers or anything. We can just do that. Like that.
Right.
That should blow all of our minds, and it should inspire all of us. And this community organizing, this idea that we don't need other people to do stuff for us. Like we can print our own leaflets. We can hand out our own leaflets. We can get together. We can fundraise amongst us and our friends to get whatever we need to do outreaches, doing TV monitors, whatever we need. We can rip down a McDonald's banner and paint the back of it and make our own protest signs, like for free. Like we can sneak into universities and use their photocopiers to make newsletters and leaflets. And we don't need people to do this for us. Like any of us can put up a sticker. Any of us can like apply a D-log. Any of us can hand out a leaflet or arrange a meeting or organize a protest or do like a publicity stunt or a street theater or whatever it might be. Like we all have this in us, and I think it's important that we all do these things. And also, I would say this also to people who are involved in NGOs and the big organizations, that doesn't preclude you from being involved in the grassroots movement. I think the opposite. In fact, my local group, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have computer programmers, we have artists, we have all different people that in their spare time are full-time animal rights activists, or
right,
as close as they can be. And so everyone should be, and particularly if you are already involved in the movement.
Yeah. Well, I really hope that people are as inspired by you as I'm inspired by you. As you said, when you tell that story at Harlan, Interfauna, like what goes through my head is just like how can I sit here and do nothing when Tom, years ago was doing this thing? And you, like you said, you guys were getting inspired by Barry, and I'm sure you felt that feeling like, how can I do nothing when this guy's eating no food in prison? So like I've been wearing this, ALF shirt on my, it's not enough. It's not enough to like, wear a hat or wear a shirt. I feel like, these are the people that inspire me to get off my butt and do something. I just hope other people feel that too. Because it is ultimately about the animals, but when we see like our fellow activists doing the kind of work that you've been doing over the years, and also to not be deterred. I mean, I think that's actually a point that we didn't raise that is kind of extraordinary. Obviously, this promise that you made is kind of like one of the pieces of that to the dog. But it would be very easy for someone like you to be like, look, I've done my time. I've put in all this effort into the movement. Now it's someone else's problem, and you haven't done that. Like, you're in this to win it. I think like you've carried that spirit of the SHAC campaign on throughout your life. Like, I didn't get in this fight to inform people that, whatever, something horrible is going on. I'm in it to win it. So I hope that people also feel that and feel the inspiration. Like I described the book as kind of a whirlwind, and it's because it sounds like it was like you're doing this action. Like you said, someone in Seattle is doing this thing. You keep talking about this guy in Italy who's launching his campaign, that Claudio guy. You've got just all these things springing up all over the world. And it all started because I guess Greg, Natasha, and Heather, had the balls to start it. And you, like, and others had the courage to step into that. As a 14, 15, 16-year-old, you were up there like, yes, that's what I want to do. which goes to show, if some punk kid, who's like a teenager, can do this stuff, like you said, it's in our power. I mean, you are a very gifted, smart person, but I'm sure when you were 14, 15, you were probably a smart kid, but you had probably a ton to learn at that point.
I was a smart ass kid.
Yeah.
I think as well, like, you're saying like I'm a legend or whatever. I strongly disagree, and I disagree because I know so many people that I feel that about. Do you know what I mean? I know people that do so much more than me, and that inspiration, like you say about Barry, there's two very specific people that really inspired some big moments in my life, and one of the biggest moments was when May 2007. When the government decided they were going to end the SHAC campaign, and they came bursting through, and they arrested 32 of us, I think, 700 police officers in this big operation that was designed to like decapitate the SHAC campaign. And Greg, Natasha, Heather were remanded to prison. A bunch of their closest friends and people that the government thought were likely to take over running the campaign were charged and bailed away from doing any activism. And me and Nikki and some of our other friends, we weren't charged because we were focused on other campaigns, and our involvement was a little bit more behind the scenes, and so they didn't know how close we were, I suppose. And in that moment, Greg told us, we were visiting him in prison, he was like, you have to stop. Like, if you carry on, they will come for you. And we kind of did take a step back for a few days, and nothing happened. Like, no one was picking up the slack. And in that moment, it was this decision we had to make of do we keep this campaign going? Like, the government wanted to end, but like I said, we knew that the reason these raids happened when they did is because we were days from winning. Like, we believed that, and we believed that for the next 7 years. But and we weren't wrong. Like, we weren't wrong. Like, it carried on for a long time, but only because of ridiculous government involvement. But the reasons that or for me personally, that I can't speak to others, but the reason I stepped up and said, you know what, I'm already on police bail, I'm already under investigation, but I cannot let this campaign die. And there was a few reasons. One of the biggest reason was obviously because of the victims in all of this, the people that had the most to lose, the animals inside Huntingdon Life Sciences. But also there was two people. One was a really close friend, Don Curry, who I mentioned, who used to coordinate my local group. He was at this point in prison serving a life license, or facing a life license for arson connected to this campaign. And the actions he had taken had resulted in a life license, which basically meant that he could be held in prison for the rest of his life. He could get parole at any point. He did get parole after 6 years. They gave him parole, but at that point, that could be revoked at any time for any perceived breach of his license conditions, which include not talking to any other vegan for the rest of his life. And he could be recalled back to prison forever. And so I mean, fortunately, like those orders have been like deemed illegal, and they started like undoing them. And he's like, just last year, he had his overturned. But as it was at that point, he had essentially sacrificed the rest of his life, and certainly the rest of his activism and everything for this campaign. And also Daniel Andreas San Diego, who was arrested just a few weeks ago, just the end of last year in Wales in the UK, who was an American activist who went on the run after being accused of 2 small-scale bombings against these companies. And he's been on the run for 21 years. He's just been arrested. And yeah, so he was on the run at this point, on the FBI's most wanted list next to bin Laden. And, you know, I'm sat there and it's like, well, how can I possibly turn my back on running this campaign that I know the campaign is lawful? The police are telling us it's not. We know it's lawful. And I just have to turn my back. I'm just going to turn my back on it when other people have literally sacrificed the rest of their lives for this. Like, I know I'm going to go to prison. I know at some point this is going to catch up with me. This decision is inevitably going to catch up with me. But how can I possibly be the one that allows this campaign to die that people have literally sacrificed their lives for? And I just couldn't. And so that level of inspiration in people, that's what motivates me. That's what motivated me then. That was what motivates me now, I think, is knowing what people, if people are willing to commit that, then who am I to be the one that sits back and lets this not happen? And I kind of hope other people see that. And I hope other people stand up for that. And it's, you know, it's why I find it inspiring when I watch actions by like Palestine Action, that people will keep throwing themselves into that fire, that people will keep doing the right thing because people are doing it. And when you're part of that community where people are leading from the front, are taking those courageous choices, you know, that tragic beauty of sacrificing yourself for something so much bigger than any of us is something that should inspire us all. And I hope it does inspire us all. And yeah, like, long live that.
Yeah, and for dogs and cats and pigs and chickens and all these animals where you're not going to get any thanks or anything like that. And you know, I got this little guy, you know, sleeping on my lap. He's just the same as all those pups, you know, like getting tested on. There's no difference. Yeah, I'm also really glad that there's more of a focus on vivisection, because it's just this kind of horrific thing that is hidden from us. I'm really glad it's sort of in the focus, because like you said, it is one of those things that's a goal that we could possibly achieve in the near future. The other thing, I know he's quoted in your book, Dr. Jerry Vlasic, who I saw him, he was giving a talk to the Animal Activism Collective, a little workshop, and they were talking about this sort of like repression. And he said, and I carry this with me to this day, that, you know, when he's feeling the pressure, he knows, like you said, the reason they're coming down on us is because we're close. If you're not feeling any heat, chances are you're not rattling the cage. So he says, when I'm feeling the pressure or something, that's when I feel like we're actually doing something. It doesn't mean I go and run and hide under my covers. That's when I feel the best, which is, yeah. And again, like, we're not trying to scare people or deter people from doing activism. There's all kinds of different activism that people can do. And like we said, it's all important. But also don't be afraid. Because, you know, I've got a friend who got arrested for handing out leaflets, like literally did. That's ridiculous. But, you know, I think sometimes even when people are getting arrested, it's an opportunity. It's like people can see how ridiculous this is. Tom had to serve 2 years because he wanted to free beagles from a laboratory, which is insane. I mean, yeah, like, everybody, like you said, the public is on our side. They agree with you. And it's only when the government, you know, manipulates people into, these guys are terrorists or these guys are whatever. You know, but getting back to what it is, trying to save animals from a laboratory, the most horrific and pointless, so many times pointless experiments that aren't even helping humanity. Like they're just for grant money or for whatever, like they're just stupid tests, you know, that don't need to be done. And they often have no relevance to human beings because they're a different species. I mean, it seems obvious. But yeah, anyway, so Tom, yeah, so grateful. I feel so honored that you were on the program. And you're always welcome on my program. If you ever want to promote anything, I know I've just got a few hundred subscribers, but you know, we can talk about it. We can dish. It's always an outlet for you. And I'm sure I can't speak for Wayne always, but I'm sure the same applies to Wayne Shung's channel. And yeah, so thank you.
No, honestly, thank you for having me. I just, yeah, I hope this will inspire someone to do something. If one person does one action because this inspired them, then that's all I want to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, and where can people find you? Like, I know we'll put some links down for your book, for your social media and stuff, but where would you like people to follow you if they could?
I'm on Instagram, tattoo_Tom. It's my business account, but I don't have a personal one because social media is the devil. But yeah, but I'm pretty active on there. So if people want to find me, tattoo_Tom on Instagram is probably the easiest.
Okay, gotcha. And if I ever make it to the UK, I'm definitely going to come to you for a tattoo. Awesome. That will be something that would be cool.
Yeah, no, you're always welcome. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Speak soon.